Welcome. Great to see you all. My name is Matt Sitter. I am a partner at Sixth Wing and CEO of AFN, our CEO, Chief of Staff, and Executive Network. We're fond of saying at Sixth Wing and in AFN, change is where opportunity happens. Today, we're going to talk about one of the biggest change that happens in many people's lives when they have a child, and oftentimes that's accompanied by parental leave. It's established that this is beneficial for the kids, for the parents, and I think it is beneficial for the organizations that enable this as well. But when we're thinking about this, this is not just time to take off to be with a child. There's a lot that's embedded around it in terms of how people's thoughts about themselves, about their work change over time. And we're going to talk about what's going on when people are getting ready to go on leave, when they are coming back during it, and how we can support them throughout. Today, we've got four panelists that we're going to have within this conversation. I'll go around really quick on for them to be able to give their background and some of their thoughts to start. But welcome. Great to see you all. Lacey, let's go with you first.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and those I can't see yet. I'm an executive coach here at Sixth Wing, and I've gotten to be a part of the parental leave coaching program since the beginning. I'm also a parent with about 20 years of experience balancing both in the corporate world, so I've navigated my own transition. But I'm here today because I've been really amazed by the shifts I've seen and how people view and take parental leave. And leaders like Lindsay, who's here with us today, who recognize the value of supporting those team members in becoming a parent for the first or the fifth time. So just the idea that it's not about losing a team member for a few months, but about supporting the mothers and fathers as they go through this shift. So if you want to create a culture that attracts and retains talent for the long haul, there's probably fewer, more impactful ways to do that than supporting parents in a way that kind of allows for life and work to coexist. So that's why I'm here today. I love the topic and I'm grateful to see these faces.
Great. Thanks, Lacey. Lindsay, since your name was invoked, we'll have you go next.
Sure. Hi, all. Lindsay Previty. I am the head of human capital strategy at Freestone Grove Partners. Freestone is a newer launched hedge fund. We've been around for about 2.5 years. And so my job really involves all things related to people. It starts with sort of hiring, engaging talent. Obviously, at a hedge fund, we don't make anything, like people are our product. So, I think we take it very seriously, sort of the hiring and the recruitment. And then obviously that goes into their life cycle as an employee. Why they stay here. It is an incredibly competitive landscape. So a lot of the things we think about is what retains them. And I think in the old days, the view at hedge funds was, it's all about the money, and money is why people stay or go. Yes, that's obviously a part of it, but I think the more we've spent time understanding people, that's not the only thing. And hedge funds in general tend to have a younger population. So many of them, I think we had 30 Freestone babies last year. On a population of our total employee base is 160. So it is something that's very important and we think sort of critical in, the life cycle of any employee. So super excited to talk. I've been a client of Sixth Wings for a long time as someone who gets personally coached by people at Sixth Wing and has brought it into organizations that I've worked at for, broader discussions and broader opportunities.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. Joe, tell us a little bit about you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here this morning. I'm in Hawaii, so I'll say morning for those of you who are on the East Coast. I am an executive coach with Sixth Wing, and I've been privileged to be part of this program ever since it began, and especially with Freedom Growth. So it was good to hear Lindsay's perspective, because I did not know you had that many babies born within the organization in the last year. That's quite impressive, and I'm glad to be a small part of that. I am also a father of three wonderful now teenage daughters, but I remember those early years very well as we tried to navigate how to do a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. I'm very grateful to be part of an organization now in my other roles that do have parental leave programs, and also see that evolve even with my background as a military officer before I got out of the Marine Corps. So just thankful to be here today, talk about some of the things that are very important, and look forward to joining this panel.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Kelly.
Thanks, Matt. I'm excited to be here today with everyone on the screen. I'm an executive coach and facilitator with Sixth Wing, and I am someone who supports the parental leave coaching engagements, and I'm also going on my third round of parental leave. So I lived this experience very recently, like 5 years ago, with my first parental leave, and understand a lot of the tension that we'll talk about, between performance and identity. And when you're rejoining a workplace culture and a team, what does that kind of feel like and how to navigate it? And then, yeah, so that's kind of who I am, Matt.
Fantastic. All right, so diving in. One of the first things I want to be able to hit is thinking about the mindset around parental leave for the person who's going on it and thinking about how this actually is a different sort of transition from them, perhaps from an identity or leadership perspective. Lacey, when you're thinking about this, how have you seen that show up as that transition of how someone is identifying for themselves or how they're thinking about their own leadership?
So I think it boils down to maybe two or three big topics. There's a million ways that I think it does that cause a little bit of a shift, but I think that a big few are perspective, priorities, and relationships. So first of all, perspective. When you're tasked with keeping something alive, be it again for the first or fifth time, there's a natural tendency to refocus on what's important, and become maybe less concerned with things that are outside of your sphere of control. So it's a really powerful reset as an individual and as a leader as far as your perspective goes. And that really affects your priorities too, right? I think it's probably one of the most direct routes to clarity, a quick route to clarity about where you put your energy, because when time becomes a little bit more of a luxury, right? If you didn't think you had enough time before, you definitely don't, now when you're going through this parental leave. And I think with that reduced capacity becomes a focus on impact rather than actions. Where can I put my energy that is most impactful? And that last one, relationships, is really every relationship probably you have is redefined both at home and work. So at home, your partner, that relationship changes. If your caregiver is a new one, or you now have a caregiver, that's a really important one, right? Be it in the home or outside of the home, a daycare. Even with your, in-laws that previously felt a little bit intrusive, suddenly they might bring you a nap and a meal. So every relationship at home can be redefined. And then at work, the vulnerability that it takes to shift some roles and responsibilities to others, to peers, to people on your team, to leadership. I think that vulnerability is a big one that can lead to trust. So I think those three are the ones that come to mind first, but there's so many. I know that everyone here probably has some ideas of where that shift really resides.
Yeah, I think that part of what you're talking about, there's uncertainty, like in terms of when you're shifting things away, what is this going to look like, particularly if it's the first time for folks that are going through it. But the assessment that's happening, and we'll dig in a little bit deeper in terms of the timeline here, because I think the stuff that you're talking about, people are thinking about this before they go on parental leave. And then when they're on it, it's an entirely different set of circumstances because, like you said, you are worried about keeping that little mound of flesh alive so that they can thrive. Lindsay, when we're thinking about this, you've said in the past that parental leave is a place where people reassess ambition, loyalty, and long-term fit relative to the firm, right? They're like thinking about like, all right, what does this actually mean to me? What's happening during that window that is making people really think about these things? And maybe is there any sort of predictability on the part of when you're looking at someone, what they're going to come out with?
Yeah, I think, look, any of these life inflection points, getting married, anything that causes you to pause, and as I think Lacey so eloquently said, sort of changes every single part of your life, is a moment, right, where you think about your career and where do you fit at the organization you are, and maybe you're talking to friends who are at other organizations. And I think it's those moments where you start to say like, okay, wait, why do I like being here, right? Why am I here? What am I good at? Where do I want to get to? And then I think you start looking around your organization and sort of saying, are there people like me here who have done this and succeeded? And maybe, do I work at an organization where everyone else is parents? And how do I see them engage with their children? And, is it a culture where I'm afraid to put my kids' 2 o'clock baseball game on my calendar because you have to lie and say that's a doctor's appointment, right? And so I think there's a lot of that. You start looking around and seeing, okay, well, how do people do this? I mean, I remember when I worked at a big bank and was thinking about getting pregnant, I actually asked one of the people, like, did you actually think about like the timing of this? And like, okay, well, if you're up for a promotion to a different level, like, should I be thinking about that? And, I think all of those things come to mind. And certainly, I think it happens for both males and females, but the industry I've worked in has always been incredibly, it's much higher percentage of males than females. So it's also a whole different, a lot of men, they don't take as long of a leave as sort of the person who actually has the child does. And so that also creates a different dynamic of how am I, do they just view this as I'm taking, a 16-week vacation? And so I think all of these things start, you really, and I think it's without a good, you tend to go to your network of people, right? It's the phone a friend, it's the, and while that's always good advice, I think sometimes that it's almost easier to do that outside an organization, right? Like talk to your friend at other places versus having those uncomfortable conversations internally, which is why we wanted to give our employees sort of this other coaching group, which is, okay, here's another place where you can toss around a lot of these questions because it is a time where you don't know the answers, right? You don't know how you're going to feel before, when you're in it, and after, and then maybe even a year after that. And so I think you need to find sort of that sounding board that you trust because a lot of times, like what you feel, I don't know, 2 weeks in versus 12 weeks in is very, very different.
Well, and I think it's interesting when you're talking about asking those questions and who you can ask them of. It is a statement that you're revealing about the culture of the firm that you work at as well. You're learning something about that organization, which maybe you didn't have the reason to dig into on prior as well. Joe, thinking about the mindset here, when someone's getting ready to go on parental leave, tell us about what they're thinking about, what's going through their head. What are the things that you're hearing about when you are actually working with folks on how to structure some of those thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. The one thing I've noticed consistently with the people I've worked with is they're all thinking almost from an anxiety perspective of they think they know what they want, but they're also thinking about the organization more than they're thinking about themselves. And there has to be a healthy balance between the two, because very often they're afraid to have those conversations that Lindsay was talking about. They may feel psychologically safe in other aspects of their job, but when it comes to taking time off, they're all thinking, am I going to have a job when I get back? Am I going to be replaced? Is the organization still going to need me? And then on the flip side of that, they're thinking, can I really take this time off? How much do I need to check in? Have I even thought through this? There's a lot of things that happen in the preparation phase, but the reality is they don't think that they can actually take time off. Just at the most basic level, they don't believe that they can just take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and that everything will just be normal when they get back. And maybe it shouldn't be normal, or maybe it should be, but they're just not even thinking about those conversations. They're a little bit nervous, and that's where we step in. We're able to give them that sounding board, that psychologically safe environment, that place where they can challenge some of those assumptions and start to have healthy conversations.
Well, and I think it's really interesting because, you said like they're worried about whether or not they're going to have a job when they get back. We know you can't lose your job by taking parental leave, right? And so it doesn't have to be, and you said, hey, rationally, we can't take away your job. Like, you understand that. And this is not necessarily a rational set of concerns that we're worried about. Is like, hey, there's massive amount of change that's here. That means that there's going to be a lot that's embedded in it that you can't rationalize away entirely. And you probably need to work through a thought process on that to be able to get there.
Absolutely.
Matt, if I could add something,
Go
I
for
think
it.
we often look at parental leave as like a benefit or a policy that is offered to employees when in reality it's this big transitional season that happens for the individual, for the family, and for the workplace culture. And so the question that I kind of wrestle, it's like, how much do I trust the culture that I am a part of at work to support me during this transition? And the policy can exist and the benefit can exist, but how much do my managers and my leaders support me through the transition so that I can have those candid and vulnerable conversations that I am concerned my job might not be here, or what will shift while I'm gone, and what will it look like when I come back?
And I think if I
Well,
can jump on that, Kelly, too, I think one of the things you said, Joe, is like we need to sort of normalize. And I think it is really hard because it's one of those situations where there is no normal, and the normal is very different for every person as they navigate this process. And so I think it's really almost normalizing the concept of like this being an uncomfortable and difficult time, both for the organization and for the person. And that, again, that's where, I'm sure Bridget's on here somewhere saying like, but that's where the magic happens, right? Like that's where you figure it all out. But in that, embedded in that is that trust between the two sides. And, you're not, to your point, Joe, you're not going to have the answer the first time you think about it, right? Like the answer for most of us always, right? And everyone's high performers is just like, we're going to figure it out. We're going to power through, right? Like, because that's probably how we've done everything. This is probably one of the few situations, at least for me, where I'm a really good power througher, and having kids was really hard to power through. And so I think that is some of this too. It's this like, there's no one right answer, there's no one normal. And just because legally your job is here, it doesn't mean what you're doing day to day is exactly the same. So I think that all gets sort of, nuanced into this moment and transition.
And when you're in it, it is an entirely different mindset than any other time. And even if you've been through it, like talking to someone who's going through it at that moment, you're not able to you can remember some of this stuff, but to be honest, I think with everyone here who's gone through having kids, like they're sleep deprived and stuff like that, you don't remember quite as well what it's like to be in that situation. Lacey, again, thinking about leading up to going on parental leave, what are some of the other things that we want to be able to think about to help a person actually structure their thoughts on what's going to be important throughout this and how they're going to be able to really manage that transition well?
So some of it, I'm going to echo what others have said, is you cannot possibly anticipate the way you're going to feel. So it's the idea that you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and not really knowing. I think the other aspect is a lot of times we prepare just for being gone. There's a lot because that's what we know. We know our world and we know how to offload a lot of the responsibilities that we have, and we might feel nervous about it, but that's still a very that's a way that we can plan and feel comfort in the planning. Probably the hardest, most difficult experience is the return to work part, where it's not just like dust up and let's go. That is the part that probably is the most tenuous of all of it, is coming back. All those fears that we had of losing ground, of becoming irrelevant. Did I affect my bonus? Is somebody else going to know something that I've missed in this last time? This is where all of that comes to bear. And I think that this is where preparing, having listened now and having experienced myself, preparing for that re-entry is a focus that Lindsay's organization and others are now spending more time on. And I think that that can be unbelievably fruitful when it comes to creating a culture that really is a good one to return to, right? And I think a couple things that those organizations do: over communication, modeling, because sometimes for really high performance, this might be the first experience with enforcing boundaries, creating and enforcing boundaries. It was easy to let that, the little bit of slide in the day and continue to work at night. So I think continuing to model holding that 2 p.m. baseball game that Lindsay mentioned, over communicating with these individuals and allowing them grace in that return to leave is super important.
Okay, so when we're thinking about that, because we're talking about distinct phases that are
Mm-hmm.
happening here, but you're worried about the return to work before you even leave. What are some of the things that can maybe calm that change that people are thinking about, where it's just like, all right, when you return to work, know that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. What can help those people in that thought process? Still with Lacey.
Coaching. I think Joe mentioned creating a safe space in which you can acknowledge those fears so they don't become so big, so you're not pushing them down, so that you have a space in which you can articulate the things you're truly concerned about. Look, I work all year towards a bonus. I'm not going to be working for this specific time of year. I am very concerned, and coming up with a discussion or a way of de-escalating those feelings by addressing them, right? Acknowledgement, building awareness, because for every single human, it'll be a little bit different what they're worried about during that time. But I think it's building awareness over what those triggers actually are can be one of the most impactful things that you can do as you prepare for leave. And the discussions that are spurred by that coaching or by that safe space.
Mm-hmm.
You might then talk with your partner. Look, this is a big concern for me. I don't know about having someone else take care of, this kid, or this is a huge concern for me, our work hours. So it's that double, number one, acknowledgement, and number two, the chain of conversations that can happen from that safe space. Even if it's with a friend, like Lindsay mentioned, we do rely on our personal networks too,
okay.
but getting it out in the open rather than suppressing it and thinking you're going to deal with it later.
Okay, so moving along in the timeline when people are actually going out on leave, massive transition where you're not in the office, all these things where you might normally be getting even, a sense of accomplishment out of. Lindsay, when we're thinking about the folks who are on leave at that time frame, how should organizations be thinking about supporting the individual there? They're not a part of the day-to-day, right? We can't rely on them to help with some of the duties that they've traditionally had, but we want them to be the best they can in that moment. So when we have an opportunity to have them back within the four walls, that they're feeling good about things. How do we support them when they're actually out?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for the last 18 months, I have had at least one person on my team, and at one point, two of them on leave. So I have really lived this. Yesterday, so this is the first time I've had my entire team intact in 18 months. So it's very exciting. And so I think the number one thing that I did with them, like before or as they were getting close, is talk about what do you want today before you have this, child and leave. What do you think you want to know about what's going on here? If you want to literally know nothing and pretend, like you're Dory in Finding Nemo and you come back and it's a new day and everything's new, I am 100% fine with that. If you want a weekly update, if you want me to call once a month, if it's just something really big. And so it's really about what they want during that period, because I wanted to respect what they did. And I had, two people who went very dark and one person who it was very important. She wanted, you'd see her pop up on Slack and she'd answer questions and she'd, and I think, and you have to sort of respect each person's difference. The only thing that I was very, had a hard line on is you can't be half in and half out, because that's where people get frustrated when someone's on leave and they answer 27% of the time, right? Because then the person who's supposed to be backing you up is like, well, are they answering? Am I answering? And so that's where I've seen friction, and people, get that sort of, 1980s eye roll of like, oh, see, this is what happens when they go on leave. They don't do anything. So I am very much like, you can opine, but like you don't own doing things, because that's where that friction will happen. And then the other big thing is, as we get closer to when they're coming back, how do you want to be re-ramped back in, right? We all learn differently. We all manage our inboxes differently. How do you want us to literally delete everything so it's a new day? Do you want 2.5 hours where I just sit and dump the last 4 months? Like, what's going to be the way where you're going to feel as caught up. And so I think that's really important. And I mean, I think probably everyone said it, but Lacey definitely, like, it's all about the communication. And I think part of what the coaching's been really helpful is on the manager side. We need the coaching too, right? Like, a lot of us went out on leave when it was like, yeah, whatever, like, we'll see you when you get back. And the only difference was you had a picture of your kid on your desk, and no real acknowledgement of anything else. And so I think we are all sort of like, how do you do this? Like, what do we ask them? And so I think that's where the coaching and sort of like the manual you guys have put together, it's been as valuable for the managers as for the person going on leave.
Well, I think that first point that you made was perfect in terms of just for the manager to be cognizant of what someone's information needs might be, right? Because, in with a lack of information, some people are just going to make up stories. Other people are going to be like, hey, that's fine. I don't even want to pretend that place exists right now. But to be cognizant of what their information needs are can really be helpful around that. And I think that the clarity on decision making, I think, many of us hope that there is no decisions that they're trying to make while they're out in this time period. But I think, Lindsay, you're like, hey, sometimes people will be trying to do that. And how do we make sure that those rules are pretty clear to us as well?
I just want to add one thing to what Lindsay
Yeah.
just said. That communication that she's having is truly remarkable because it's leaving that individual in choice. And I'm not here to say 20 years ago when I had my first kid, obviously I didn't have that conversation, but it didn't even occur to me that that would be an option. So I think it's a huge difference between the then and now. And that's part of the significant shift we're talking about. Lindsay is sitting down with her team members and has had a lot of practice with this past year, it sounds like, and saying, what do you prefer? Because exactly what you just said, Matt, some people fill in the blanks with anxiety, right? And so some people, they might like that a little bit of a check-in once per, and some people prefer not to. It's more stressful to hear little things and not be able to act on it. But the other clear differentiation she made is knowledge versus action. I do think removing that action allows the team to continue without them. So I just want to point out what Lindsay is saying is truly leading the way that people can take leave and re-enter.
Perfect.
If I can also add to that, Matt, one thing when Lindsay was talking and Lacey just added to it is I kept hearing her say, like, what is most important to you right now? And that response is very important because is the employee saying staying connected is most important to them out of guilt because they feel that they can't disconnect? Or are they saying that's really important to them because they truly just love their job and they want to make sure that the organization continues to thrive during this period of absence? And there has to be that healthy conversation. I just wanted to point out the fact that everything I heard them saying, Lindsay saying, is really what is most important to you right now? And how can I support you in that effort? So love those comments.
Great. And so when we're thinking about both sides of the coin here, Kelly, you're getting the opportunity to think about this. When you're about to go out on parental leave, what is your hope for support from the organization during that time? And how would you encourage other people to think about it?
I think it is exactly how Lindsay was talking about it. When I think back to my first parental leave, it was probably the best benefits package I had. But the support I had on reintegration was not quite there. And the second parental leave, my amazing co-founders, Bridget and Laura, it was a shared responsibility that Lindsay was talking about of here's what do you need from us and here's what I need from you, and kind of establishing what the individual needs to feel supported and then what does the organization need. Like, I need information, not action. I'm not going to allow action from you during this time. I thought was really I loved that delineation, and that's one thing that I kind of hope as I go out on a third parental leave, it's a collaborative of like, this is what I need. What do you need from me? And how do we continue to make sure that the organization is functioning at a level it needs to, and I'm getting what I need as my family goes through this transition as well.
Okay, so it turns out communication is important.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew? But we've talked about reintegration a lot. And Lacey, you brought this up first in terms of thinking about reintegration. And I do think like when the moment hits is just like, all right, I'm coming back. And what does that look like? Give us a little bit of a sense on what's going through the minds of the person who is about to come back and what sort of support that they might need that isn't anticipated by that person.
So, I mean, Lindsay kind of stole some of my thunder on this, that
Sorry.
communication yeah, thanks a lot, Lindsay. That allows choice. I think in the disruption, of course, there's a lot of things that do change. Remembering that in any transition, we tend to revert back to what worked for us in the past, and deciding, just building awareness of whether or not that is something that you want to carry forward or not is a really important thing to consider, right? So just know I'm going to go back to old habits, which might be trying to log on the entire time I'm here in the evening and multitasking and doing all of that. So I think that the first thing is that building the awareness, the over communication, and then really every single thing that Lindsay said and the things that she's starting to do with having those uncomfortable conversations, and holding space for them, knowing that it's not just a quick transition. I had it, you got it, you're back. Like here's where you are. I think all of those are really important.
Great. And Lindsay, go ahead, Kelly.
Well, I was just gonna, for the individual going on parental leave, I think two questions that I work with my clients is now that I've gone through, I have this new living being in my household that's solely dependent on me. It's like, who do I want to be as I step back into work, like for my team? And who do I want to be as I show up at home? And then how do I want to show up when I'm living in both of those roles?
Lindsay, when you're thinking about, you just had a couple people come back. When you're thinking about the first 30 days versus the first 60 days versus the first 90 days that they're back, how do you break apart that transition? What looks different about those pieces as you're thinking about helping this person to reintegrate?
Sure. So one of the big things, and I do this just from my own personal, is I recommend that whatever that you have to one, you have to practice leaving your child because it's actually pretty hard. And you're there, you're in charge of everything, and you're just like you're in it. And then all of a sudden it's like you're not going to leave for 10 to 12 hours a day. And that's really hard. And you need to know how you feel because it's really hard to have that and then sit in an office and attempt to do your office stuff. So I always recommend that week one, so practice. However, if they're going to go to daycare, if they're going to have a nanny, if it's going to be your mother-in-law, whatever it is, start practicing that for 2 weeks before and practice it in a small, first it's an hour, then it's a couple of hours. So that first day back, you're not figuring out how to get up, shower, get out of the house, get to an office, and be a functioning person. And so I think that is really helpful. And I also tell people, do not come back for a 5-day week the first week. Come back for 3 days, come back for 4 days, then come back for 5 days because all of this is an adjustment. And so that first 30 days is we are practicing, right? We're figuring out, you're telling me, hey, I used to get in at 8:30. I'm now going to get in at 8:47 because that's when my train comes in or whatever it is, and that's all part of the practice. And there needs to be a ton of grace in that period of just the first 30 days are the practicing, right? You don't feel right. Everything feels off. You're anxious about coming back. Then you get back and you're like, oh, wow, this is great. But then on the fourth night, somebody gets the stomach bug, right? There's all these things. So it's very much, to me, the first 30 days back it's really just a continuation and it's a practice. It's getting someone up to speed. And then I think at the 60 to 90 days, it's constantly that, okay, what's working and what's not? This is how we used to work. This is what we used to do. I used to Slack you at this time or text you at this time. And is that still working for you? Right? And I think it's this constant check-in of what behaviors are we doing now that are different and are they working? And are they working on both sides, right? Are they working for the person who's rejoined and are they working for the manager? And if they're not, what can we tweak? I think I forget exactly who said it, but we go back to what we've always done. And so I think we need in this first, call it 90 days to constantly assess okay, we've established this new rhythm. Is it working for both people? And if it's not, what can we tweak? Because I think we all kind of go to that all or nothing, right? It either has to be the way it was the old way or we've got to overhaul the system. But sometimes it's marginal tweaks and you just need a little extra headspace. And I also think that's where the coaches are helpful because they can say wow, my manager seems really annoyed that my throughput isn't as high. And then they can say I don't actually think, I think that's you, not that, so I think that's that helpful, extra voice in there to say, okay, how could you approach them about that? How do we talk about that? Or for me as the manager, hey, wait, this person's saying they want to work from home. Like, what do I do? How do I address this? And so I think it's a lot of this, like, nothing is set forever. And okay, we've started this pattern. Like, is this working for everybody in the system?
So there is a ramp up that's there. And I like that you were talking about practice in this. I think what's implied in there is like, hey, the decisions that we talked about limiting decision making while you were out on leave, you maybe don't want to make all the decisions right when you get back right away as well, if you are in this practice time frame. Kelly, did you want to add anything to what Lindsay was saying?
Well, well, not everyone, but I'm a physiological nerd. So if you just think about the difference between like 30 days and 90 days when you're coming back from work too, and like where the baby is at developmentally from a sleep perspective, is like if you're coming back at 6 weeks, you're definitely not sleeping a lot then. If you're coming back at 4 months, oh, there typically is a 4 month sleep regression that wreaks havoc on a household. But by 7 months, maybe the baby is starting to sleep a little bit more then. And so then how you're showing up at work, if you're getting at least 4 hours of consistent sleep, it might also be helping the way that you're showing up as an individual.
Okay, so yeah, these children are changing a lot over this time frame. Understand where you're at. Lacey, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think a theme I hear throughout all of this is just giving yourself grace. So Lindsay had a great idea. Don't go back for a 5-day week and don't practice. I would say also we read a lot of things and we decide a lot of things in advance of that leave. We're going to be cooking organic. We're going to be blending. I know I did. I was going to be blending all kinds of food. I was going to feed them a certain way. How about a little grace for maybe you might be late once or twice while you're practicing this new way of being. And that might be really a hard line for you. Give yourself a little bit of understanding that this is a new way of being. Maybe do take out a little bit more. Like consider what the standard you've created for yourself before you even entered this world and realize that some things can be a little flexible as you go through, as Kelly beautifully put it, the 30, 60, 90, 6 month, a year. You might not be an organic mama and that, and dad, you might not be the one who's taking over all of the food preparation, and that's okay too.
Okay, so yeah, I think we've got everything figured out here. We know how to do this perfectly now. But organizations still might not get it 100% right. Joe, what do you think are some of the things that organizations, maybe through no fault of intent, are not getting quite right around this?
I think sometimes they get caught up in the in the policy side of it, the checklist mentality. What Lindsay described earlier is not about policy at all. It's about empathy. It's about having a priority for an organization. If an organization says that retention and taking care of their people and supporting them through this process is important, then what does that look like? What she described was that 30, 60, 90. And then Lacey and Kelly added on, we're not just talking about 30, 60, 90, we're talking several months. We're talking about a year later checking in and just saying, how are you doing? And not how are you doing with the checklist mentality of following that policy or accomplishing your duties, that really a lot of things can be replaced, effectively replaced because they are checklists. But what does that employee actually bring to the table as a person? And how are they doing as a parent? Are they giving themselves the grace that Lacey talked about? And it requires a lot of empathy on the side of a leader, uncommon empathy, when they sit back and they say, you know what, I've noticed that this person used to think this way, but their priorities have shifted. And that's still okay with us as an organization. But let's at least have the conversation of how do we best employ them now? How do we best support them now? So to answer your question a little bit more succinctly, it's really that empathy, that long-term check-in. It's not a one-time thing.
Well, I think the attitude that we're all bringing to the table here is that human capital is like one of our biggest advantages for organizations out there. They are really the thing that are going to make it go in a way that it can't otherwise. We gotta have our people to be able to be the best organization that we can. Lindsay, you've seen this from a bunch of different angles at this point. What else do you think organizations are not quite doing right, or have not done right in the past that you've seen?
I think some of it is around the education of kind of everyone in the system, right? Like the person leaving and the manager they're in it, right? You're figuring out how to get everything done. And so you're in it, you know where they are, but I think it's very rare that any of us operate in a silo. I know certainly my team and most of the teams here, we are very interactive. So I think it's making sure that the whole firm understands like the value of people and the value of people in transition and the value of people of retaining people. And I think that's sort of your overarching umbrella. And this is one of those moments. And I also think, especially if you have, generations in your office of just because that's the way it was done before or how you did it doesn't mean that's the only way. And I think that can be hard, myself included. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I know how Lindsay would answer, but the person who sits in my role needs to answer a different way. And I think sometimes that's hard. Like people have to decouple what their experience was, how they did it, with what is actually a constructive and engaged way to do it. And so I think it's really educating the whole system on the importance of that. I notice it too. So I think we've spent a lot of time talking about, more of the person who has the child, the moms, who are out longer. But I think even there is a shift. I mean, none of the men here, who are, older took any sort of leave. I mean, maybe a day, 2 days. And so they have a very hard time when someone comes to them and says, okay, I'd like to take my parental leave. And they're like, what are you talking about? Right. So it's sort of educating this, like, no, actually, like if we want to see these transformations and these, changes in engagement and in families and in your employee base, like these are the things that have to happen. And you have to support the dads through the process or, the other spouse during this period and helping them understand like this is the value for this employee and this is why they're doing that. And I think that can be, it's a big mindset shift, and especially in an organization that is, majority men, I think they feel really uncomfortable asking for this sometimes. And so sort of helping them have that space to say, okay, this is why we do it. And, like, look, a lot of times I mediate and get in the middle and sort of say, okay, manager, I get it. But like, do you want this person here a year from now? And they're like, well, of course. I'm like, okay, well, let's think through what's going to keep this person here and have this person walk through walls for you. This kind of loyalty to them is going to make them want to be loyal to you. And so sometimes it's sort of that reframing and mindset shift of they just see the like, wait, I'm not going to have this person at my beck and call for 4 weeks. And you're like, well, correct. And let's figure out how we can make this work for everybody.
Well, and I mean, I think part of what you're talking about is how are we using this to actually reinforce the culture that's overall here. My favorite quote on culture, which a bunch of people have heard before, is that's just the way things are around here. But that's for everyone. That's not just for the manager and the person that's going through it. Lindsay, I want to go into one more point with you, and then we'll open it up for questions overall. So you were bringing up the manager as they're talking about how do we make sure that the manager actually is empowered to have these conversations? If it's like, hey, we want to be taking care of the person, how do we make sure that they're actively engaged in it in a constructive fashion that they kind of know how to go about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the either coaching or the person who sits in my type of role, sort of the people person inside of an organization, I think needs to really bring that up. And I think it is sort of this very engaged discussion between people and sort of helping them because they have to work through their thoughts on it too, right? Like it's not and they probably need a little bit of a safe space. You shouldn't be testing it out on the person who is going out on leave. I think you kind of want to think it through and, sometimes the things you want aren't going to be realistic and it's not what they want. So I do think it's, needs to be part of, to the point of like, right, we all have a leave policy and the federal government has one and right. But it's like, okay, well, wait, what does this actually look like in action? How do we operationalize this? Who are the people that are the go-to people when this is going sideways? Or, people just feel frustrated. So I think it's that there's formal people who have it. And then it's sort of those informal culture carriers in the organization, the people who've done it before. You need to create that feeling of you can go to them, hey, they executed this really well, or maybe they didn't execute it well, but they've just been through it. So they'll be able to give you sort of a sense of, that.
Yeah. I mean, perfect. Managers who haven't been through it before, this is a learning process for them as well. And we can support them through that. Okay. So for the folks who are on, if you want to ask a question, please come up on video and, ideally direct it to one person, but if you're saying this is for everyone, that's great as well. If you don't feel comfortable coming up on video, please feel free to put your question in the chat. So we're open for questions now.
I see one in the chat already from a name that seems somewhat familiar, Bridget, but I do want to address it because I think there's something I want to highlight about what Lindsay just said. So she asked, what do you think
Can
about
you
how to
read off the
best,
question? Yeah.
yes, what do you think about how to best empower managers to have those conversations? Because she kind of does mention and allude to a very wide shift in the willingness to have those. Lindsay kind of hinted at this. I think it's the education portion of it, right? That standardized, gender neutral, because this is a gender neutral parental offering, is really important. And of course, you have to cater it. So even if you offer a cadence of conversations as the standard, you have to cater it to those who feel most uncomfortable. But I think that gender neutral part of it is really important because this is for fathers and mothers or partners. The benefits now of paid paternity leave and holding that space, there's so much data around the impact of that, from improved child language and test scores and better support to their partners, which then increases their ability for women, women's career advancement. So I think that there's enough data behind this now to make it impactful for anyone who participates and to educate those in the workplace on the importance to that cultural aspect of any organization when they want to be a good place to work and live.
Great. Other questions?
But I want to start saying it's really great to hear a conversation about things that I've felt. If someone's taken leave twice, the first with my daughter is 12 weeks. With my son, it was 6 months. And clearly the 6-month leave was after I was like comfortable with the leave life cycle and navigating all those things. Kelly, you described having a really good benefits package the first time, but your return still being a little bit wonky. And Lindsay, what you're doing with your team, as far as giving them the choice, it seems like it's making a big difference. And it's what Kelly probably needed initially. How do we make sure that an employee's experience isn't dependent on getting somebody like you, Lindsay? And kind of answer the question a little bit, but and how does the employee advocate to have that conversation with their manager so they have that conversation that you have if their manager isn't proactively having it? So I guess it's like 3 questions in one. So it is for everybody on the panel.
I mean, I think so. I think if the organization doesn't have it, the more direct and organized the employee can be about saying, okay, like this is how I think I want to like transition these things. This is how it puts the burden on them as opposed to it being sort of the back and forth. So I think that's, look, it's less than ideal, but it is one of the solutions. I think like any of these policies, unfortunately, and we've hit on this a lot, they're only as good as the paper. It's the people who execute them, right? Like they all look basically the same on paper, right? It really to the culture of the organization and the people that are executing them, which is why I think it is this great like retention moment. And it's a moment where your culture can actually shine, and your culture is more than, everybody rah-rah having drinks or, and that actually create the culture. It's not the happy hour and the holiday party. Like these are the things people remember, much more so. And this is because these are like life's toughest moments. So I do think the more people can embed that in a culture, I think it's really hard for an employee to say it, but it's true, and I think if the organization isn't giving it, the employee has to like be very uncomfortable and do it. But that would be my answer, which isn't great. I think it's really hard to do. But I think that's sort of what you would have to do if you don't have that person on the other side.
Anyone else want to jump in? Yeah, go ahead, Kel.
Yeah, I would add, it's like that first parental leave I had, it was about 5.5 months long. And so the reality of that is all best plans, laid before I stepped out on leave. And then while I did, a lot changed for the organization and my team while I was gone. And so when I came back, there were so many variables at play that made it a rough reintegration. A deployed spouse, a team that was no longer there, a manager that had left the firm. And so I didn't have the resources or the people to reach out to kind of bring that policy to life. I tried doing it. And then I was also the identity tension that I mentioned between or the tension between identity and performance. I wanted to, hit the ground running. And so I made a lot of sacrifices around personal boundaries to make work happen. And it ended up resulting in kind of like a very close burnout. When my husband deploys from deployment, he's like, wait, you're waking up at this time to this time to do this, this, and this. It just didn't make sense. And so a lot of that was on me. And I guess what I wish looking back, maybe there had been someone else I could have reached out to help me pull the career ambitions and goals that I was hoping to achieve, help that all come together a little bit more seamlessly.
To that point, I think, it's that rock stars versus superstars, right? And if you've always been the superstar, and then this is the phase of your career where maybe you're going to be more the rock star, that can be really hard to internalize. And so I also think back to the organization and then on the manager, you have to value both of those individuals, and that it's okay. It doesn't mean you're not good, and it doesn't mean that you don't have a place here. And I think, both sides, it can be very hard for both people to realize that and accept that. And for, fellow superstars, we're no, we will always be superstars, and we will figure it out and power through. And I think it's okay. Just like your life is going through a transition, like Kelly said, every single relationship, who you are as an employee is also going to change a little bit. And it's okay because it can also change back.
I needed Joe or Lacey as my coach, really, Matt. That's what I needed, Lindsay.
I'll break out the time machine and we'll make sure to fix that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could have used Bridget back in 2008. That would have been really helpful.
One of the questions that we've got in the chat. So when we're thinking about, sometimes there's a difference in balance between what the leadership is demonstrating and what the organization says it's doing. And so the question is, how do you think about encouraging parental leave when the culture of the organization from the top celebrates those who take the least amount of time off? Joe, let's get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, when I read that question, the first thing that came to my mind, just being real, is alignment. Your values have shifted. You realize what's most important while you're on leave, and you come back and you realize on the extreme side, this doesn't work for me anymore. Kind of what Kelly was saying. You have all these other variables in life, and you're getting up at some ungodly hour in the morning when you're already probably awake because you're taking care of that newborn baby that we described at the very beginning, and you have to make a really tough decision that the priorities of the organization no longer align, and you need, the best thing you can do is realize that I need to depend on my network, whether it's coaching, friends, family, or coworkers. You're not in this alone, and you have to assess that alignment and have those tough conversations, because sometimes the reality is you have to make some significant life changes to really prioritize what is truly most important to you.
Lacey, same question to you. When we're thinking about the organization, who can call out that there's actually this massive difference between what you're seeing from leadership and what people are thinking is right and what the organization is saying? How would you address that?
So this goes well beyond just parental leave, right? This goes to the hero kind of ideal of these people that don't take leave or stay online or come back early. I think what we have to do is kind of de-glorify that behavior. We have to praise those people. Don't praise them for doing things that are in opposition to the way that we want to create the culture around here. You can praise people for dedication in other ways. You can praise them for holding boundaries, for taking leave. And as leaders, we have a responsibility to model the behavior that we want to see, right? So I think Lindsay mentioned a time that I lived through where you would put something on the calendar for your kid. I remember having a kid, doctor's appointment and pretending it was something else. So I think we have to be honest. I'm taking off today because I've got an assembly that my kid is participating in, and be vocal about that. And as leaders, celebrate that. And I think for leaders considering their own parental leave, remembering that not taking it is kind of a planning failure. It's not something to be demonstrating the way to take it and having a quiet conversation. If there's a senior leader who you know has an outsized influence and is not maybe going to set the best example, quiet conversations to encourage them to walk the talk that we're trying to build in an organization can be super duper impactful in showing how to do it well, right? Engineering coverage, putting some of that effort into I guess that coverage as a muscle that we routinely pass things off, even in normal leave. It's okay that I'm gone. Nothing will fall through the cracks. Look at what we can do as a team because we're here for one another. So it's much beyond. It happens before someone's considering parental leave. It's an ongoing conversation. I think it's important across the organization.
Lindsay, thinking about your organization and what you've done in the past, being able to call out leadership on this differences in behavior, where do you think that should come from in the organization?
I mean, it kind of has to come from everyone. I feel like for whatever reason in organizations, at the end of the day, there needs to be some people who are confident enough in their position or confident enough in their skill set that if they poke the wrong bruise and something really bad happens, they're going to be able to land somewhere else. I think good leaders want the people who don't just say they're the prettiest pony, right? Good leaders want to tell them that like their baby's ugly and like they want to know where the warts are, what's wrong. I think it's hard to do it. But I think if you work for a leader who doesn't want that, then you quickly know that, this maybe isn't the right place for you, or this person isn't as great a leader. I definitely experienced that. Someone I thought was an absolutely exceptional leader. Right when I asked for something that was a little bit hard and they completely folded, and it told me everything. It's that line, right? When people show you who they are, believe them. And so that started my look for more employment. And it really made of all the things that were swirling in my head, like that was the moment. And so I think people who can tell leaders that of saying like, hey, look, like, it takes one of those things to get someone to take a call from someone like me who recruits people, right? And so I think that's what leaders need to understand is that, all of these little actions, while none of them, the death by 1,000 paper cuts, all of a sudden the person's like, what am I doing? And these are these moments where leaders need to understand that, everybody gets a blow up, everybody gets a bad convert, right? We all get one, but if it's an every other week, every other day, like that's what's going to happen to your people. And if you say you value them, you actually have to show them that. And values can't be a thing on a wall. They have to be like, everything has to be operationalized. Everything has to be lived. And if the leaders aren't willing to do that, at least hear it, then it's probably the wrong place, which is a drag because usually in the middle of like life's biggest transitions, you're also like, wow, recruiting and looking for a new job doesn't feel like the most exciting thing in the world. And I think you can also, to everyone's point, give yourself some grace and say like, this is not the place for me. And in 30 days or 60 days, when my child sleeps more than 7 minutes at a clip, like I am then going to address this, right? Like we all can deal with discomfort for a period of time. And I think as long as there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I think that's part of it too. Like you don't have to blow up everything. Again, I'm a big blow up everything, but like I've learned that's not actually probably the most effective way to do it, right? You're like, okay, this is a disaster. Life is a disaster. This disaster I can live with for 60, 90 days and then, make some of these big overhauls.
Great. Well, so we probably could talk about this for another 2 hours. So that's a good thing. I think that this is something that a lot of folks are trying to get right. We're trying to do this in a way that we can support our people really well. We've talked about some of the things to consider around that. Really appreciate the panelists bringing forward their expertise around this. For everyone who came, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you being able to take this in and the attention that you're paying to this. If you want to talk about this more, obviously there's a lot of passion that we have within our organization about this. We are more than happy to talk about that. But in short, thanks to all panelists and thanks to you all. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Happy Friday.